Good evening, everybody. My name is Christian Love, and I proudly serve as the program manager for the UW Commons. I want to welcome you all to tonight's Louder Than Words series. I'm also a doctoral candidate here in education at UW Seattle. We first want to begin and acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. So welcome again to everyone. We want to welcome our community members, our UW alumni, faculty, staff, students, and all those joining us tonight in person, but also via the live stream. We're very thrilled to offer our Louder Than Words series here at the Commons. The Commons is both a physical space and a place-based initiative where we really are really segmented and really focused on our greater Southeast Seattle communities. Our doors opened in January 2019, and as a result, we have been thriving and flourishing with our programs. I was talking with a colleague earlier this academic year. We've been doing great with our programs in terms of nonprofits and CBOs hosting their events and retreats here, faculty hosting their work hours and their faculty meetings here, RSOs hosting their events. So I want to invite you all to please do sign up for a reservation request. There are lots of openings for spring quarter and the summertime. You can sign up on our website, washington.edu/Othello. So our vision here at the Commons is really rooted in being valuable, present, and long-term partners here in the greater Southeast Seattle community, and we serve as a catalyst to that work. So again, we're here to advance equity, education, health, and opportunities for our Southeast Seattle community members. But with that, after a 2-month break, just due to rising COVID-19 Omicron cases, we are back here in the space for our Louder Than Words speaker series, and we're very excited to have our sponsors, which are the Undergraduate Academic Affairs and also the Office of External Affairs. I'd like now to introduce my colleague and friend, Sally Clark, the Director of the Office of Regional and Community Relations, to introduce our very two esteemed guests for the evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Christian, and it's great to have Christian back as well. He's got everything that you heard about with the Commons is great, and he's got a new baby girl too, so back after that leave time as well. And the pictures are great. You should ask him about it later. So welcome to all of you. My job is to welcome you and to remind you a little bit about what we do with this series, and then I will very briefly cue our guests here. You can see their bios in the program that you were handed when you came in, and you'll get to hear from them about why this evening is something I've been looking forward to for quite a while. As a reminder, we started this Louder Than Words series in October, and it had to do with how do we come out of the pandemic and how do we come out of and continue through what is a time of great conflict, great disagreement among all of us in our country about some really fundamental things that we are challenged by, things that maybe some of us didn't think about enough previously and are called to think about them more, called to act. And when Dean Taylor and I were talking about what could we be doing to help activate the Commons, the Othello Commons, as we are coming back into community physically, in person, here together, we thought about how do we bring people into this space and have really great dialogues with people in our community who are finding ways to knit us back together and to find ways that we together figure out how to correct the wrongs that we are maybe recognizing, some of us are recognizing more than we did in the past, and others have lived with for a very long time. That could be political, that could be, we're going to talk about justice issues today, criminal justice issues today, incarceration issues, but we've had a nice span of conversations here with folks in the Commons. Dr. Danielson is with us tonight. We started out with Dr. Danielson, Ben Danielson, in October. We talked about Martin Luther King's visit to Seattle and had the Northwest African American Museum folks with us here, having a great conversation. We talked in December with Colleen Echohawk about what did it mean to have a Native American woman run for mayor of Seattle, and had a fantastic conversation with Colleen. We then, thanks to Omicron, took a little break, so we didn't see you in January or February. And we're really excited to be back in the space here. And as a reminder, we have a small audience in the space, and those of you who are watching with the live stream or downloading this later, we're very grateful for UW Video's work helping us live stream these and capture the conversation as we go forward. Christian mentioned earlier, there is Q&A that will be a part of tonight. What you will be cued to do is to, I know this will be shocking, raise your hand. And Fran is going to come around with a microphone. We've been kind of testing this thing, and we find that it actually works better if the live stream audience can actually hear the questions. It makes a lot more sense, and so we're trying that out tonight. And so when you've got a question, we'll get to that point in the conversation, raising your hand, and Fran will be around. With that, I'd like to just briefly introduce, and again, you've got their bios, so I won't go deep on this. Sean Goode is immediately to my left here. Sean is the executive director of an organization called Choose 180. And we're going to have a great conversation here about what Sean's path has been, but also what Choose 180 does, and the kind of community-engaged, I'm going to say repair work and future work that Choose 180 is engaged in, and that they do, and that Sean does from a completely different approach. And we had an interesting conversation just about the basics of philanthropy before this conversation, and about the approach to what it means to gain support for a vision and how to connect people to that vision to move forward together. Ed Taylor is further over there to my left. Ed is the Dean of Undergraduate Academic Affairs and a professor in the College of Education for the University of Washington. Ed has been such an esteemed co-conspirator in this work of how to make the Othello Commons work, but also what louder than words can be. With that, I'm going to get out of the way, and let's get on with our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just moved to be here with you. And first, I'm just watching you as Sally is introducing you in this moment of time that we're in, when we sit at the precipice of war again, race in America, which isn't new, poverty, all the things. And I'm watching you, and you have kind of a half smile, and you have a look of seriousness as well, and you are nodding your head, and you're wearing a husky hat. And I'm just watching all of those things happening at once. Thank you for wearing the husky hat.
Well, let me just create clearing here. So the story behind the hat is pretty simple. My barber was out of town, and so I had to order a hat that I could wear that would match. Otherwise, I'd have to expose my hairline.
Tell the truth, though. You know that there's a game tonight. You know exactly what time that game is.
Right,
You know who's
8:30.
playing.
The game is at 8:30. I am a Husky fan,
Okay.
and I am wearing purple with great intentions.
So it's not an accident.
Not an accident, but the hat is to cover up the hairline.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. You said yes to this, Sean, and you say yes a lot. What makes you say? Where do you find the time? Why do you say yes so often when it comes to just even simple conversations about how we make our community better?
Yeah, I do say yes a lot. I laugh because my wife is right here, and she's like saying, "Yep, you say yes an awful lot." I have this mantra that that runs through my head all the time, and it's to open the door and explore. That it's important to go through and see what's on the other side, and see if there's something there for you. And I also think that I've had the privilege to survive so much trauma in my life, and have the liberty to sit in the miracle of today. And as I sit in the midst of this miracle, and enveloped by grace, it behooves me to pour out that which is within me, because otherwise I would be living for tomorrow that's yet to come. And so if I have the opportunity to say yes to share space with all of you and to have this conversation, then absolutely, positively, yes.
You invoke two things that I want to take you up on, because for you, Sean, this work is deeply personal. And I'm sensitive to this question to start with, because you and I are black men sitting here in front of an audience, and I know the importance of not performing our blackness. But for you, this work is deeply, deeply personal. I want to talk about Choose 180, but I want to talk about why you're convicted about this, what inspires you in the first place, and why this is so deeply personal for you.
Yeah. Well, I believe that young people are possibilities to be developed and not problems to be solved. And I believe that at the core of my being, because of this journey that I've been on, and my own personal engagement with the criminal legal system. See, our organization exists to transform systems that cause harm and support the young people who have been impacted by them. And I have firsthand witnessed the harm that these systems cause. My earliest experience with the criminal legal system was when I was a 6-year-old boy. And it's when I went to visit my brother, who at the age of 13 had his behavior criminalized in a way where he was locked up until he was a 21-year-old man. And this is the earliest memory I hold of my brother. And I remember this day so clearly because I walked into the facility and I went up to the guard desk, and he was excited to see me because on the wall behind me was an article, and it was written about my brother. And it wasn't about what he did to end up in this space, but it was about what he did as he was in here. And he went and spoke at a school, and they wrote an article about how inspiring he was. And at that moment, it wasn't lost on me that yet for one poor decision that he made, he would be out doing this every single day, inspiring others to do something different. But because of a poor choice, he was locked up in this kid jail until he was a 21-year-old man. Now, fortunately for me, when he did get released, I was 13 and beginning to demonstrate some of those similar behaviors that ended up being challenging and problematic for him. But as he became part of my life again, he was able to witness what I was experiencing and see my behavior and listen to my behavior instead of criminalize my behavior. And because of what he heard and what I was behaving and acting out, he saw me as something that was possible and not problematic. And being credible because he could witness it, and saw me as possible because he had experienced it. That is the fortune of the work that I get to champion every day, is assuring that young people in our region have a chance to be seen through the lens of possibility. That young people in our region can be connected with somebody who's credible to them, who will be able to listen to their behavior instead of criminalizing it.
So there's some reframing, because there was so much in what you just said, and some ideas that contradict. You said young man went to jail. You said kid and jail in the same sentence. How do we get kid in jail? How do we criminalize children? Because you talked about him being a 13-year-old. Yeah. That's a child in my mind. Yeah. But yet jail is something fundamentally different. How do you end up in the same sentence, kid and jail? Well, even use the term kid jail.
Yeah,
that doesn't make any sense.
In Washington State, you can be 8 and end up criminalized for your behavior. 8 years old. In fact, we worked hard with the legislature to raise the age from 8 to 13 and from 17 to 19 to be considered a youth and have your behavior criminalized. But some of our legislators pushed back because they were afraid that gang members would recruit 8-year-olds to carry weapons and cause harm because they knew they wouldn't be able to be criminalized. Just like chew on that for just a moment to consider the rationale that's necessary to justify criminalizing the behavior of an 8-year-old child in our state, and to pull that forward because of an off chance of some sort of interaction. We have a deeply rooted obsession with criminalizing the behavior of black children, brown children, and indigenous people of color in our nation that goes far beyond our faux progressiveness in this region and is deeply rooted in systemic racism that extends 400 plus years. And we only have 30 minutes, but I can unpack some of that if we have the time. Like,
you can unpack as much as you want, but I'm still trying to undo this notion that somehow you have child and system, child and criminal. You have to undo the notion of what constitutes a child in the first place, and rename them something fundamentally different.
Yeah, I mean, young people, when they get put in these facilities, get numbers attributed to them, right? And they begin to embody a number because they begin to lose their identity. Who they were outside of this space is no longer relevant inside of this space. I served as a chaplain at juvenile detention, the kid jail up at Alder, for about a decade. And met with many young people at the most challenging moments of their life. And every single one of them, even those that were accused of doing some of the most egregious things, were kids. I remember a 12-year-old that I met with who was accused of taking the life of someone else. Cognitively, he was 8 years old. And yet they still went forward to charge him as an adult. Cognitively 8. Physically 12, 13 by the time he went before a judge. Charged as an adult. Sentenced to serve adult time. We have a challenge with grace in our country. We have a challenge with mercy in our country. We have a conviction that's deeply rooted in a narrative that the only way to persuade people towards better behavior is to bring a heavy stick. And when I say people, I mean black people. I mean people in poverty. I mean people who don't identify with the dominant culture, because those are the people who the stick comes out for.
Brian Stevenson, each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. That's at the heart of your language. This word grace and mercy is going to come up a lot for you. I want to talk about Choose 180. And if you wouldn't mind, just describe what Choose 180 is, how you came to a place where you envision community, not courtrooms. You're pushing against the system, this prison system.
Yeah.
How did you come to choose 180, to choose community, not courtrooms?
Yeah, I was fortunate to steward a cause that began prior to my arrival. I had the privilege to be the first executive director, but the work began in 2011 in partnership with Dan Satterberg in the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. And essentially what happened was, that's all a good story. See, what happened was that Dan recognized he was failing black and brown children. And so he reached out to a community leader, Doug Wheeler, who started Zion Preparatory Academy not too far from where we're sitting today. And the two of them met together and co-created what at that time was called the 180 program, so that young people could have access to community instead of a courtroom. Because what Dan, the prosecutor, knew is what all of us in community know, that we have what we need for our young people. We just need the resources to provide it to them and the structure to assure that safety is present for them when they return home. This isn't an issue of how do you get black and brown children to behave differently? It's how do you resource communities equitably so they have what they need within them so their children can thrive instead of barely get by.
You hear an applause here. So how did it move from Dan Satterberg's office to a nonprofit organization? And it's interesting to hear you partnering with the prosecutor's office, because here's a place of contention. So how did you get to a place where you even had grace for a prosecutor's office?
Well, I can speak about my journey to that.
Please.
But I will tell you, Doug Wheeler historically has worked in partnership with system leaders. That's his way of being, because he doesn't take the acrimonious approach towards relationships. If redemption is for one, then redemption has to be for all. If redemption at any point becomes exclusive, then we can begin to exclude those from redemption that we so choose, which then means we are judge, jury, and executioner. Then we become complicit to the same system of judgment that we think shouldn't be in place. And so if you're a prosecutor, or if you're a police officer, or you're a politician that has a position that I vehemently disagree with, you're still a human. And the integrity of your humanity has to supersede any of your actions at a point of me seeing who you are first before I consider all of what you've done. That's messy and it's complicated, and there's tension there. Because there's been moments where Dan has done things and his office has done things that I've disagreed with, that I've written things in opposition to. And at the end of the day, I have a role to play. And I believe that it's very difficult for people to tear down the house that they're living in if you tell them that your house has to go away. But if you invite people to co-create something else that lives outside of the space that they're familiar with, they'll use their resources, their bricks, their wood panels, and help you build something that lives in community, that can then thrive in community, and then alleviate the need for it altogether. And I'll tell you, an exciting thing that we haven't really talked about a ton yet is that the youth diversion program that we started back in 2011 in partnership with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office in 2022 is no longer necessary. The referrals have dried up altogether, because what we've proven is if you provide an alternative outside of the system that lives in community, we resource it accordingly, we stand it up and offer the supports, then young people begin to get what they need, and we no longer have to criminalize the behavior for those resources to be present. If we can do it for those young people, we should be able to do it for all young people. But it's so difficult to do it when you put yourself in juxtaposition of those who hold the positionality and the power and say, well, you're bad, I'm not going to engage with you. Because the minute I other the other, I become the other. And I'm doing my best to untie myself from complicity in the very same thing that I've watched cause my family harm.
You are talking about grace and mercy for everyone involved, even those involved in systems to do harm. But before I go to grace and mercy for them, I want to talk more about Choose 180 and what happens to kids. So if they move from the prosecutor's office to you, talk about what the program is and talk about what happens for kids. What work are you doing with kids?
Yeah, so the way it works foundationally is that a young person lives in a neighborhood that's overly policed. Because they live in overly policed neighborhoods, their behavior gets criminalized. I structure it like that because it's important for us to understand that a young person who steals something from a store and pushes somebody on their way out, that becomes a robbery, right, instead of theft. Now, they're just pushing somebody at, not just, I don't want to minimize the behavior, but we're talking about adolescent behavior, right? Many of us have made poor decisions that have harmed others, and And depending on the neighborhood you grew up in, that was either mediated between parents, that people got involved, even if police got involved. They may have driven you to your house to have a talking to, right? It's not always manifesting in the way that it does in our neighborhoods. And so when the behavior is criminalized, typically what happens, it goes to the prosecutor, then prosecutor to the courtroom. Because of our relationship, it gets referred to community instead of the courts. And the charges that would otherwise be levied upon this child get dismissed. And the young person is engaged in a community practice where they receive grace instead of guilt. And we've watched the 12 to 24-year-olds that we served historically, over 90% of them don't return to the criminal legal system within 12 months of engaging in our program. Because guilt locks you into that moment of poor decision making. But grace liberates you to become who you've always dreamt yourself to be and holds you accountable in a different way. Because I believe at the core of my being, to whom much is forgiven, much is required. And I've been forgiven for a ton. So I know what's required of this life that I now have the privilege to live.
You think of it as almost like an emergency room kind of system where you do forms of triage. It's wraparound. One size does not fit all.
Absolutely.
Talk a bit about that philosophy. How are you meeting the needs of kids?
Yeah, it's an intentional approach where young people get engaged. We work through our curriculum that helps young people identify where they are, where they desire to go, what are the right supports, right choices they need, and what needs to get left behind. And what it does is it flips the typical assessment on its head. Usually when young people are assessed, what we're doing is we're asking them a bunch of questions so we can tell them about themselves. Right? What we do is we have an assessment that the young person gets to know themselves, and they teach us about them. So they're driving, they're vested, they're the one that's steering the thing. It's our responsibility as the adults in the space to get them what they need to honor this commitment that they've made for themselves. And because of the impact of the work, we've been able to scale it beyond just our practice with the prosecutor's office and operate in schools as an alternative to suspensions and expulsions. Because wherever a young person's behavior is being criminalized, we need to be able to intervene until that system changes and is no longer causing that harm. And I hope we talk about it later, but I believe that the very existence of our cause should be unnecessary because our existence is predicated upon young people experiencing harm. And as long as we're here, we're evidence of the harm still existing. So we have to work as intentionally to transform the systems that cause the harm as we do to support the young people on their journey of transformation.
So you see a day when Choose 180 should not exist, but you're also at the heart of what you're saying. You want to reframe this altogether so that children are not problem people, black folks are not problem people. You have a problem with the conception of what constitutes naming a problem to be solved in the first place. Talk about your philosophy about how we even resolve what are now tensions for us.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we look at a problem, then we're immediately looking for a solution. We're looking for a way to resolve the thing. And then once the thing's resolved, we think it's finished and it should just go on and be fixed, right? I'm the father of 2 children. I have a 14-year-old and a 20-year-old. There have been many moments of poor decision-making in both of their lives, much less in my daughter than my son. I'm kidding, son. But there's been many moments of poor decision-making. And in each one of those moments, they were simply responding to their adolescence and the environment that they were in. Like, this is just part of growing up, part of your brain developing. My son will be 21 in December. I was talking to him the other day. I said, I just need to get you to 27 because at 27, I feel good about the decisions you'll make. And he responded to me, well, then I got some bad decisions to make now. I'm like, that's not what I was alluding to, son. But this is the evidence of his, you know what I mean? That just speaks to the thinking, right? And we know this to be true, right? Brain science tells us these things. So if what young people are doing is simply responding to the way that their brain functions, how's that a problem? And if they respond differently based upon the environment that they're placed in, then I would argue that the environment is what needs to be changed, not the young person. And that's when we get into a broader conversation about these material conditions and how programming is simply a stopgap that exists long enough for us to change these material conditions that continue the suffering and the manifestation of this disease, which we call violence, that permeates throughout our community.
We are siloed in our approach to the work of changing conditions for young people. There are child psychologists, there are social workers, there are educators in the criminal justice, but we've got systems. So if Sean Goode had his way, imagine a system, and let's start with education. Imagine a way that we can rethink the way that we educate young people, so we get to the heart and the root of, I'm not going to call it a problem, but we rethink how we form and help shape the lives of young people. Because you have something to say about schools also, although you're not working in a traditional schools, you're working across schools. But talk about how education fits in all this.
Well, I think first, if we begin to envision, all great envisioning starts with reparations. It starts with making sure those that have been historically impacted as a result of 400 plus years of bondage that's continued to be perverted and manifest in ways that keep black folks locked up disproportionately. We have to start with reparations. Repair has to be done. You know, I believe in restorative practices, which means that the two people come together, the person that's been harmed and the person that caused harm, and we come to an agreement on what needs to be done in order to move forward together. There's a complicity that has yet to be addressed that continues to cause generational impact and an imbalance of wealth that plagues our educational system, that then plagues our young people, and it just continues to roll on through. So I think, like, first and foremost, everything starts with reparations, right? But once we get to that point and we can have that broader discussion, which is really hard for folks to talk about, because we can find billions of dollars to send elsewhere to address harm happening in other parts of the world, but we can't find billions of dollars to address historical harm that's happened right here in our country. And I find that to be deeply challenging. I mean, an aside for another time maybe. But in our educational system, I imagine schools where young people are able to sit in classrooms that are well-sized, and they're able to see teachers that look like them, look like their family, have their lived experience, where they can connect with, where they're in neighborhood and the teachers live in the neighborhood, and everybody is fostering a healthy and intentional environment. Imagine schools where every young person had an individual learning plan and every young person was being coached based upon what their desires was, instead of funneled together in a group where we were working for the average and highlighting the exceptional and pushing out those that can't find their way into this middle, right? I mean, I know it well personally. I struggled with school. It took me 15 years to get my AA. I'm waiting for the UW to give me an honorary degree so I can just put that in the box. I mean, it is what it is, you know. But I think it starts with making sure that the schools are reflective of the community, and that the teachers are able to work in those spaces and reflect back to the students what that looks like. But then we also got to resource the teachers in a way where they're not struggling, and that can be a profession and not a job. Which goes right back to the economics. It goes right back to the wealth. And this struggle that we have in valuing labor in our country, particularly labor that's done by Black, Indigenous people of color, and women.
And it even goes back to the language, this language of school to prison pipeline. Where does that language come from? How do we even think about school to prison and a pipeline? We've got to undo even framing the development of young people that way.
And that speaks to the whole problem orientation, right? I mean, like, studies have been done on reading levels and how many prisons they would produce based upon the reading levels that young people were at. That's like a thing, right? Why you want to build prisons to scale to support young people who would eventually be there speaks more to the privatization of the prison industrial complex and the high cost of putting young people through college, and how capitalism seems to seep its way into each and every aspect of our lives. I mean, like, capitalism was built off the backs of Black people. I regularly say that, like, Black people benefiting from capitalism is like asking the chocolate chip what the cookie tastes like. And we all know the chocolate chip is the best part of the cookie. And so in that, how is it possible for Black folks to benefit from a system that was created on their backs, and yet we continue to want to find a way to make it work in the context that we live in today? That's not a deviation from the question. It's just affirming the fact that, like, these pipelines exist because capitalism needs low-wage workers who could do better, greater work, but because of the way that they've been channeled into criminal charges, into neighborhoods that are economically depressed, that have a lack of access to quality schools, quality health care, right? Green spaces, right? Pro-social activities, community centers, culturally appropriate engagement activities, right? Like, if we envision a place, you and me right now, we can close our eyes and picture a place.
We absolutely could. We absolutely could.
let's just channel the suburbs, where police are called because of noise complaints and mailbox theft, and young people walk to schools with teachers that look like them, and parents have living wage jobs so they can pay their mortgage and save for their children's college tuition. Like, can you imagine a place like that? Like, yeah, there's lots of places like that in Seattle. In fact, if you go down Rainier, if you go a block towards the water, there's lots of places like that.
Right.
You go a block away from the water, you feel like you're in a different world altogether.
Right.
That only exists because of our continual investment into a narrative that we can fix things with programs, that we can fix things with legislation. And these things are necessary, but we have to do something to balance out this wealth disparity.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you don't have capital, if you don't have wealth, then you can't position yourself or your family to be able to transcend what we're stuck in generationally.
There are those who have said that this is a moment in time. As you and I are sitting here without masks on, but our friends that are in our presence have masks on. People have talked about the pandemic as an inflection point, George Floyd as an inflection point. And I can see you smiling. You have a problem with that conception altogether, that this is a moment in time, and I'm going to agree with you on this. Talk about the problem that you have with this notion that George Floyd's death invokes an inflection. It's a moment in time, or the pandemic is a moment for
I don't have where I'm challenged at is that people get grounded in that, but they don't move from there. You know, we are entering in a new phase of a global pandemic. We experienced the greatest social unrest in our world after the murder of George Floyd in 50, 60 years. And people, because they were at home, couldn't do anything except ride their Pelotons and hop on their Zoom screens, were fixated on screens and watching the murder of a black man in the middle of the street at the hands of police officers, those that would kneel on his neck and those that would stand by and be complicit in the kneeling on his neck as he shouted out that he could not breathe, called out for his mother. We watched that. And while we were sitting at home with nothing else to occupy our hearts and our minds, many people were compelled to action. Many organizations and companies came out with bold proclamations and statements, made commitments to investing in organizations, and some of them owned up to that. But there is billions of dollars still on the table that have yet to be invested that were promised and committed to. Because those corporations know what we all know is that our attention span is so short. What did Ted Lasso say? Goldfish? Is that what Ted Lasso said? Goldfish attention span? Right. So many of us have that goldfish attention span.
Swipe right, swipe left.
And as soon as it's gone, it's gone. And when the world began to open up a little bit, and we got our vaccination cards and we could go out and do things, then all of a sudden it became less important to those of us that didn't have to live in the tension of it before and still live in the tension of it after.
You did some things. You're calling on organizations to do things, but you actually did some things with Choose 180. And I'm going to read from Emerald City. Choose 180, local nonprofit that supports and announced that it would raise its baseline salary of $70,000 per year, or more than $20,000 pay increase for frontline staff. Yeah. That made news, and a lot of us paid attention. People walked away with a $20,000 increase. Talk about your framework. How did you get to that place?
Yeah. I didn't wake up one morning and feel like the benevolent executive director, right? Like, that wasn't what it was. I had a staff team who was holding me accountable to honoring their humanity, is what I had. I had a group of people who were continuing to impress upon me that their wage wasn't sufficient, even if it was the market rate, that they were fully persuaded that the market was set wrong for their livelihood, and they continue to press me on it. And the shorter version of a much longer story is one of our team members, while we were working on our budget, said, look, Are we resourcing our team to live in the same material conditions that our young people are, that we're working to pull our young people out of? And in doing so, doing great work with our left hand and causing harm with our right. And I took that and I talked to a couple of our staff members and asked them about their experience. And I asked one of them about the possibility of buying a home for her and her daughter, and she laughed at me and said, that's not possible. It broke my heart because, see, I had gotten so distant from the pain point, I lost touch with the reality that they were experiencing. I mean, I remember the time I slept in my Saturn, my two-door Saturn in the Home Depot parking lot, and then I put on my orange apron and walk into the Home Depot and sell and cut keys and sell screws out the hardware section, right? I remember when I worked for a large nonprofit and was making $10,000 to $15,000 less than my peer because I didn't have a college degree. I experienced what they were experiencing, but I did what it is that we tend to do in our community and did the Oppression Olympics. See, it's a different iteration than bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is this narrative where you just pull yourself up. Oppression Olympics is when I say, well, look what I survived. And because I survived it, you can survive it too. And that's just what we got to do out here is struggle to survive. So it was moments like that. And I'll tell you, like one of the things that pushed me over was two things. Number one, I realized that I was the only one getting in the way. And I didn't know that I held that kind of power. Like, I was the one that was stopping this from happening. And then I also remember, as I was reading a book called The Color of Money, and it was talking about the wealth gap, that black families hold a nickel of wealth to the dollar that white families hold. And if I, as a black man, am largely employing black and brown people and contributing to the wealth disparity because I'm in the way of considering what's possible around paying people a living wage, then I'm contributing to the very ill that I believe that we have to be working to solve. And so, absolutely, we did the thing. I'm grateful we did the thing. And I will say that I'm honored by organizations like Collective Justice and Creative Justice and Freedom Project, who at the foundation of their causes started out in an equitable way of paying instead of having to right a wrong in the way that I had to.
I want to change the course a little bit because let me come back to something. I want to come back to this notion of grace for a second. Then I want to talk about love for a second. In this moment in which we are so divided around
Everything?
Everything, but in particular, policing and justice. We've been marching in the streets. Black folks haven't agreed on what the solution is. We've been marching and fighting with each other over what the right thing is to do. But yet, you extend this notion of grace to even those who wear uniforms, police uniforms, those who carry guns. How do you expand this notion of grace to even include those who, by virtue of their work, by virtue of their positionality, have done harm? Go back to this notion of grace for all.
Well, grace selectively applied is favoritism. And anybody can play favorites. But if I extend grace to one, I have to extend grace at all. And if I don't, then it's not grace at all. And that means you have to extend grace when it's inconvenient, when it's uncomfortable. But when you're centering the humanity of the person and you're seeing them like dressed in the same flesh that you're dressed in with a uniform on top, it's complicated because there's a tension there because those people in those uniforms have caused harm to people who look like me and come from my community. I know that to be true. And I also know that there's many people who are officers that wake up in the morning and they're not thinking about the harm that they're going to cause. That many of them legit are going out to protect and serve. They've taken their commitment seriously, and this is just how they're showing up in space. I also know that implicit bias and historical racism impacts the way that they show up in space. This thing is so incredibly layered. I think the system of policing is inherently wrong. I think it's rooted in slave patrols. I know it's rooted in slave patrols. And then when slaves were people who were enslaved, were liberated, then it was used to control property, right, as people, right? It's constantly been a device used for the marginalization of black folks, and it is what it is. But not everybody that's doing the thing is holding on to the historical narrative of what it is that they're doing. They're doing it because they think like this is their way to serve community. It's complicated. But I can't be complicit by not extending grace. But what I can do is be critical of how they show up and how they serve and continue to work to dismantle the narratives that allow them to have a foothold in our community, period, point blank. I can do that work simultaneously without making a person wrong. Like, you don't have to be bad to be a police officer. I just think the system of policing should be unnecessary, and that we can keep our community safe if we envision public safety in a way that allows neighborhoods to have what they need to flourish, instead of being economically disadvantaged, disinvested from, and requiring folks to tap into a secondary economy because they can't get jobs in the primary one.
You are not a one-dimensional brother. You know how to fight the good fight. You know how to be in the streets, in neighborhoods. You know how to be in community. You know how to put your fist in the air and fight when it's necessary. There's a side of you I see now, and you invoked it early on. Your wife is here.
Yes, she is.
Because you are as passionate about the way in which you love your community and love your family. And I'm going to ask you to see if you can conjure up something, because I've seen you get poetic also. And now you're looking over, people don't know who you're looking at, but you're looking at your wife, Kimberly. I want to give you a moment before we turn to question and answer, for us to just see that side of you. If you were to invoke your imagination, conjure up some words of love for those that you care about.
Yeah.
Not scripted, not written. What would come from your heart?
At my weakest moments, in you, I find my strength. There's so much I could have ever imagined, but with you, I accomplish all. They see me well-spoken, well-read, well-informed, and what they don't know is, prior to you, my spirit and heart were torn, separated from one another, impossible to attach, because the trauma that I had survived had kept me away from that. I didn't know how to trust, nor did I really know how to love. All I knew was how to survive and forget while trusting God above. But you taught me about grace. You taught me about forgiveness. You provided what everyone needs, a divine witness. And because of the truth you hold and the journey that we walk together, I understand what it means to transcend time, because our love exists forever. And I am grateful for today. And if given tomorrow, I'll celebrate, because I know I have the love of my life, my wife, right here, her face, her hair, her divine features, an inspired by God, beautiful creature, intelligent, brilliant, resilient, and strong. It's in your arms, in your embrace, and in your life I belong.
Deep breath. Let's take questions. We've got about 20 minutes, and it's a chance for you all to engage and ask questions if you'd like. You've got friends here, folks that you work with.
Which is wild, because I had friends show up to hear me talk, and they hear me talk. You know, it's cool. One of my running partners is here, and she's wearing regular clothes, and that's always special.
She's wearing regular?
I'm like, it's always interesting to see folks who, like, you only see in athletic gear.
Uh-huh.
You're like, what? Yeah.
Running is important to you. So Sally, there's a handheld mic, and Sally, you can certainly start with a question. If any of you in the audience has a question, just go ahead and put your hand up.
I'm going to go back to how you started talking about what it is that Choose 180 does. And I think my guess is that there is so much that goes into each of those relationships when there is a young person who Choose 180 can try to connect with. And I imagine that there are ups and downs in those relationships, and that sometimes there are disappointments. But I'm curious, can you unpack a little bit more for us what it means to try to connect and build that trust with a young person when there is a referral?
Yeah.
And what are some of the things that work? Or maybe what are some of the things that Choose 180 has learned from some of the disappointments?
Yeah, well, first, there's no disappointments at all. There's expectations, and I expect, like, nothing's linear, right? Like, you know, like nobody's life is like, and I had this moment and everything was great, right? Like, if any of y'all had that experience, you're the one. Congratulations. Like, it's you. You're the one, right? So no disappointments, because we're in anticipation of ups and downs, but we're here for that. And young people know real recognize real. And so it's real easy to tell when you're unfamiliar, right? But if you're familiar, you get it. right? And young people can pick up on that. So it really attributed to our team, right? We have a bunch of people who are real, who are coming at this from a lens of what they've experienced themselves and are connecting with young people, not because they want to save young people, but because they want to hold up a mirror for a young person and create a pause long enough for the young person to see themselves reflected as who they really are. This isn't a process of we change the lives of young people. No, young people choose to commit to a new direction. They choose. That's why it's choose 180 and not make 180, right? Young people are choosing a new direction because it's the direction they want to go. Like, they're the champions. We're stewarding a process. That's what, like, parenting is like for me. I'm the steward, right? My kids don't belong to me because there's going to come a time soon. I still say a time. I feel like my son's already at that time, but, like, I don't want to believe that time. Stop nodding. I don't need the affirmation. But, like, there will come a time, right, where I'm no longer playing the same role that I am today. Young people are universal. We're stewarding over the lives of these young people. We don't own them. They don't belong to us. Like, they have their own ability to lead, and we need to step back and let them lead while giving them the support they need to do it in a safe environment. I mean, that's really legit. Like, when I talk about these material conditions being differently, like, if the material conditions were differently, we'd have more safe spaces and young people could do what young people do and do it safely. We take away the safe spaces, we create more insecurity, then people make decisions that are challenging because of the insecurity that they're experiencing. And so, if anything, our organization creates safe spaces for young people to lead, independent of a guiding hand, but offering a philosophy and a trusted voice to be a mirror to consistently remind them of who they really are. And that speaks to the brilliance of our team. And I'm super fortunate that I get to steward an organization that has so many brilliant and talented and gifted folks serving within it.
You run a nonprofit. You raise money, which puts you into communities with wealth inequity. And you have to talk to and ask for money from people who may not even believe that what you believe. What's your attitude and belief and approach to fundraising and philanthropy?
Yeah.
One, not everyone you're talking to is necessarily evolved to the place that you are.
Yeah, I don't actually ask for money. Yeah, that's not a thing. Why would I? What I do is I invite people to lean in with their time, treasure, or their talent in ways that are personally meaningful to them. It's my conviction that we are a community, and that if you're in community and you see something working or something happening that you believe in, then you lean in a way that's meaningful to you. And that as long as we are connecting with our community with great intention and honoring the individuals who are pouring in, then folks will lean in ways that matter and we'll be able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. We went from, in 2017, we were one full-time staff, serving a couple hundred young people a year. We'll serve a little over 700 youth and young adults this year with a much larger team. Our budget's grown exponentially, and it hasn't been because I've like went and buddied up next to really wealthy people and convinced them or persuaded them to invest in the work. It's because we do really great work. And I create space for people to be invited and connect to the work. And I invite them to connect in ways that matter to them. Some people that's volunteering, some people that's giving financially, some people that's offering advice or being a sounding board. But whatever that way of being is, it all matters. What we do inside of nonprofit organizations is we begin to categorically value people differently. We have our donors. We have our volunteers, right? And like, what? Like, we have our young people. What? Like, why are we treating anybody differently within the cause? If you're giving financially, or you're giving your time, or you're giving your life in the hands of our team members and trusting that we're going to be able to support you, you carry equal value. None greater, none lesser, equal. And if we come into equal space, then you're invited to contribute equally as well, in whatever way makes the most sense to you.
So you don't ask for money, you invite people into community and bring people along with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's church. You know, I mean, it's church, right? You come and you give, and if you're the woman with the two mites, right, that's honored. Or if you have capacity beyond that, it's a church reference for church folks that are tapping in, right? Like, the minister inside of me can't help but like exegete a text or two.
Could you tell he's been to church?
And so like whatever it is that you feel compelled to do, but what people need is community. And we need to create space for people to be connected to community, because you know what? The person with substantial resources that wants to invest in our cause, they need to be on a journey towards justice as much as the young person needs to experience justice. So why should we not create a pathway for the volunteer or the person contributing financially to journey with us and exclusively reserve that for young folks? We all got to get to a more just place together. All got different starting points, different places we're coming from, but we got to get there together because there is no greater power than the collective us.
There you go, extending that grace again across differences. What questions do you have? What are the questions do you?
And again, like with, children, I'm great with awkward silence. So we can also just like.
So thank you for being here, Sean. I've heard your presentation before. I think what you're doing is fantastic. I'm kind of curious about how, because a lot of our criminal justice system is definitely born in control. But also there's this sense, on the part of some folks that there has to be some level of punishment, you've heard the phrase, the punishment must fit the crime.
Yeah.
And I really have loved the terms grace and mercy tonight. I think those are fantastic. Have you seen grace and mercy as you've gone through this process in terms of how we're handling young people who've made some mistakes or some poor choices in the forms of the folks who were victims of that? And have they exhibited some grace and mercy in that?
Yeah. And is it Randy? Yeah. Andy, thank you for the question. There is a ton of research and actual programming, both locally and nationally, that proves how harmful the criminal legal system is to people who have been victims of crime, because they don't actually get the resolve that they're looking for. The sentencing happens, and then they're left with the question mark of, what do I do now? Also, more often than not, the harm isn't really repaired because they don't get restored for whatever it is that was taken from them. For example, let's say a young person takes a cell phone, right? An iPhone. Those things cost like $50, $11, right? And so they take an iPhone, it's a high-priced item, now that's a really big crime, right? What's the likelihood that that family is going to be able to pay back the cost of that phone to make repair to the young person who lost their phone, right? And so what's happened recently, this rolled out, and it's only a few months fresh, but over the course of the last 2 years, our organization, in partnership with several others, has stood up a new program called Restorative Community Pathways, which in essence does exactly what it is you're talking about. It creates the space for both those that have caused harm and those that have been harmed to engage in a restorative practice, where there's an exchange of grace and understanding, so both of them are involved in a healing journey and end up whole on the other side. Because the old adage is absolutely true. Hurt people hurt people. And unless we close the cycle of woundedness and invite everyone on a healing journey, we're only going to see more harm caused after harm has been caused. So absolutely, we see it both locally and nationally that there is a way forward. Part of it is educating people who have been harmed, because we've told them, like, this is how you're going to feel better. You will feel better when the gavel hits. You will feel better after the sentencing. And when they don't, they feel like something's wrong with them, like something's unresolved. We have to do better, right? One of the shows I fall asleep to when I can't sleep is Law and Order, right? I know, irony, right? And it's probably because it's the same show over and over again, just different things happening, right? Like one gung to the next gung. It's not anything different, right? It just is what it is. So I fall asleep to Law and Order. Don't judge me. You can. It's all right. I have grace. But the point being, right, is like that's not how it works, right? You see like the tears and the hugs at the end and everything. That's not how it works. You run that thing out 5, 10 years, and that person's still depressed because they're missing their loved one. That person's still looking over their shoulder when they go to the light rail station. That person is still experiencing the trauma of what occurred because they weren't actually invited to a healing journey. They were told, here, you're better now because this person's gone away. That the person being out of the community doesn't mean that you're healing or whole. It just means that that person's not going to be able to heal, and you're not going to be able to heal, and you're not going to be able to heal together.
Sean, you also your organization has made a commitment to compensation that was unique in helping. Do you talk about that? Is that a challenge to other organizations that are in the helping field, which traditionally has lower compensation?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about, and how do you speak to the challenge of compensation in professional helping?
So that question's about the compensation that your employees, and when I read that piece, I saw it as in part a message to other organizations for equitable pay. So the question was,
Yeah, absolutely. Brother, what's your name?
got to get the mics.
Kalfani Mwamba.
Pleasure. Now, what I want to be clear is that what we did in community with the understanding that there's other people who had done it successfully. And so it was helpful to already have folks who were holding a standard that you can pay equitably and still lead a nonprofit organization. Our staffing is a little bit different, and we had to come from a place of causing harm, so we had to find where those resources were coming from, but we're gonna make it work, and I'm not worried about it. Like, I live by faith, not by sight, right? And this may make some people insecure, but I don't need to know where the money's coming from to know that I was doing something wrong and it has to get right. To know that I was causing harm and that I could be a part of not causing the harm, then I'm just gonna go do the thing and we'll figure out how to make it work. Right? I survived 100% of my worst days. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be around tomorrow with given the grace to do so. In regards to a challenge to others, first and foremost, what I wanted to do was encourage foundations and funders to understand that there's a new way and a new wave, right? Nonprofits historically think they have to follow the funders. Wherever the funding goes, that's where we have to go. They got the game of follow the leader all mixed up. We are the leaders. Philanthropy will follow us, but we gotta stop following philanthropy, right? It's kind of like running in a circle because everybody chasing their tail. No, if we change direction, philanthropy is gonna follow us because they need us. Nobody else is gonna do what we're gonna do, so if you want this to happen, then you're gonna need to resource this happening in a way that doesn't cause harm for the people who are doing the hard work. And other organizations can make those same changes. Fortunately, I've spoken to a little over a dozen different nonprofits locally and nationally who are doing different things around compensation. Not all of them are doing it as aggressively as we did it, but they're inching towards a more equitable way of being, and I find redemption in that. I've also talked to funders who were absolutely on board after we did what we did. They were like, thank you, right? How can we help? How can we support? So if we're ever, the market rate for nonprofit salaries was set by people who aren't working in nonprofits, right? It wasn't set, it was largely set by dominant culture, and that's not who's serving in these spaces. So if we're going to reset the market, we are going to have to reset the market. And organizations like ours have been blessed with a platform, then we need to use this platform to push forward things like this to make everybody else understand it's okay. You can do it, and the whole world's not gonna fall apart. Thank you for the question. I appreciate you.
We have time for one last question.
Make it a good one. No
Make
pressure.
it a good one.
Pressure, of course. Well, thank you, Sean, for phenomenal conversation. Thank you, Ed, as well. Final question, we're reaching our time here, but I'm curious. You mentioned community a lot. You mentioned love. Do you have mentors that have supported this work in your life, or a board of trustees that you go to for those hard questions, those challenging questions?
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, there's this visual of a boxing ring that I often hold in my mind. And it's easier to go out into the world and take all the lumps and take all the hits when you can come back to your corner and know that everything's gonna be all right. And having my wife in my corner gives me the solace I know that everything's gonna be all right. There are others who have encouraged me, folks like Judge McCullough. And I always say Judge McCullough is like Father Abraham because he has many sons. And many sons has Judge McCullough, right? Everybody's been touched by Judge McCullough's life, right? He's somebody who's been a consistent presence and a reminder, right? Being able over these last 12 plus months to be in relationship with Dr. Ben has been transformative for me. This man is a giant and he calls me his mentor. That's the kind of humility that he walks with, and I know that I'm not alone, right? Being able to live life out with people like my friend Carrie Sutton that's here, right? Who I can experience life with day in and day out. People who are sounding boards for me. They're here tonight too, like my friend Cadman. We run together twice a week for hours, right? We are processing life together and talking about leadership challenges together. My dear friend Kisa that's here is someone else who's been a sounding board for me consistently over these years, from when I was at the YMCA to when I transitioned into Choose 180 and the many struggles that have happened throughout. This doesn't happen in a silo. Success doesn't happen on an island. It takes a community of support for our young people, and it takes a community of support for all of us. I am the evidence of love. I am the evidence of conviction. I am the evidence of strength that's not held solely within me, but held within the many that lift me up.
So the last word goes to you. You invoked Dr. Ben, you invoked your wife. We have young faculty in the room. We have business leaders in the room. We have community in the room. Sean, just as with the last few seconds that we have, just say a few words about the kind of community that you want to be around, the kind of people that you want to be around, and what gives you hope. And just come from the heart and wax poetic for about 30 seconds.
Yeah, I was, this image is the one that's sticking with me right now in this season. I was running Stewart Park with my other running partner, Heather, and there's these birds. They're called American coots. You can Google it later. But they're like black duck-looking birds. And they all come together in what's called a raft to keep warm and also for safety. As I was running along the water, this beautiful, majestic, bald eagle was swooping up and down and around, looking at these birds, thinking about breakfast, right? And a couple things about the eagle, and I'll be succinct, that's magnificent to me. Like, I don't know if y'all know, but an eagle's nest can weigh over a ton, right? Consider that an eagle is born into a nest. How does an eagle know how to make a nest, right? If it's born into the nest, an engineering marvel to sit in branches that weigh over a ton. Like, I don't even want to sit on a branch myself. I put on some COVID weight. I don't feel good about that, right? But over a ton. And so this eagle, right, by divine design, built this nest, now swooping around the water, and there's this community of birds that are ready to fall victim to this eagle. And the eagle swoops down to the water, and immediately they dive, and as soon as the eagle goes away, they come back up and come back together. The eagle swoops around again, they dive, they spread apart, and as soon as the eagle goes away, they come right back together. Every time the threat shows up, they hide, they dissipate, they ruffle the water to make it difficult for the eagle to see, and then they come back together. I want to live in a community that wherever the threat on high is coming from, that we respond with intentionality and we come back together. I believe if that's the divine design of these American coots, if that's the brilliance that's embedded in their DNA, then how much more in ours as we center on who we truly are, regardless of the threat. Let's come back together.
Thank you all for coming. That ends our discussion today. We'll let you know when the next conversation happens. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being community, and thank you, Sean.